In his maiden speech to the House of Lords on February 27, 1812, 24-year-old poet, peer, and politician George Gordon Byron, the sixth Lord Byron, became one of the few members of the peerage to defend the Luddites. These anti-technology weavers had been destroying automated looms for destroying their livelihoods and villages. Byron spoke specifically against the frame-breaking Act of 1812, which encouraged betrayal of one's fellow citizens and applied the death penalty to loom machine breaking. Here is Lord Byron's text from the Recollections of the Life of Lord Byron. This presentation also includes graphics of artificial intelligence and its over-reliance on the electric grid, causing prices to increase everywhere across the United States. Unlike the Luddites, artificial intelligence has seen no widespread protests or legislature passed to address its environmental concerns. Moreover, artificial intelligence has seen no push to switch to nuclear power, which would reduce its reliance on the grid as well as its reliance on water cooling centers, which are taking water from lakes and rivers all across the United States. Here is Lord Byron's speech from 1812, which seems more relevant than ever today to defend the Luddites. My lords, the subject now submitted to your lordships for the first time, though new to the House, is by no means new to the country. I believe it occupied the serious thoughts of all descriptions of persons long before its introduction to the notice of that legislature whose interference alone could be of real service. As a person in some degree connected with the suffering county, though a stranger not only to this House in general, but to almost every individual whose attention I presume to solicit, I must claim some portion of your lordship's indulgence, whilst I offer a few observations on a question in which I confess myself deeply interested. To enter into any detail of these riots would be superfluous. The House is already aware every outrage sure of actual bloodshed has been perpetrated, and the proprietors of the frames obnoxious to the rioters and all persons supposed to be connected with them have been liable to insult and violence. During the short time I recently passed in knots, not 12 hours elapsed without some fresh act of violence, and on the day I left the county I was informed 40 frames had been broken the preceding evening as usual, without resistance and without detection. Such was then the state of that county, and such I have reason to believe it is at this moment. But whilst these outrages must be admitted to exist to an alarming extent, it cannot be denied they have arisen from circumstances of the most unparalleled distress. The perseverance of these miserable men in their proceedings tends to prove nothing but absolute want could have driven a large and once honest and industrious body of people into the commission of excesses so hazardous to themselves, their families, and the community. At the time to which I allude, the town and county were burdened with large detachments of the military. The police were in motion, the magistrates assembled, yet all these movements, civil and military, led to nothing. Not a single instance occurred of the apprehension of any real delinquent actually taken in the fact against whom there existed legal evidence sufficient for conviction. But the police, however useless, were by no means idle. Several notorious delinquents had been detected, men liable to conviction on the clearest evidence of the capital crime of poverty, men who had been nefariously guilty of lawfully begetting several children, whom, thanks to the times, they were unable to maintain. Considerable injury has been done to the proprietors of the improved frames. These machines were to them an advantage, inasmuch they superseded the necessity of employing a number of men, who were left in consequence to starve. By the adoption of one species of frame in particular, one man performed the work of many, and the superfluous laborers were thrown out of employment. Yet it is to be observed the work thus executed was inferior in quality, not marketable at home, and merely hurried over with a view to export. It was called, in the cant of the trade, spider work. The rejected workmen, in the blindness of their ignorance, instead of rejoicing at these improvements in arts, so beneficial to mankind, conceived themselves to be sacrificed to improvements in mechanism. In the foolishness of their hearts, they imagined the maintenance and well-doing of the industrious poor were objects of greater consequence than the enrichment of a few by any improvement in the implements of the trade which threw the workman out of employment and rendered the laborer unworthy of his hire. And it must be confessed, the adoption of the enlarged machinery in that state of our commerce which the country once boasted might have been beneficial to the master without being detrimental to the servant. Yet, in the present situation of our manufacturers rotting in warehouses without a prospect of export, with the demand for work and workmen equally diminished, frames of this construction tend materially to aggravate the distresses and discontent of the disappointed sufferer. But the real cause of these distresses and consequent disturbances lies deeper. When we are told these men leagued together not only for the destruction of their own comfort, but of their very means of subsistence, can we agree it is the bitter policy, the destructive warfare of the last 18 years, which destroyed their comfort, your comfort, all men's comfort, that policy which, originating with great statesmen now no more, has survived the dead to become a curse on the living, unto the third and fourth generations. These men never destroyed their looms till they were become useless, worse than useless, till they were become actual impediments to their exertions in obtaining their daily bread. Can you then wonder, in times like these, when bankruptcy, convicted fraud, and imputed felony are found in a station not far beneath that of your lordships, the lowest, though once most useful portion of the people should forget their duty and their distresses, and become only less guilty than one of their representatives? But while the exalted offender can find means to baffle the law, new capital punishments must be devised, new snares of death must spread for the wretched mechanic who is famished into guilt. These men were willing to dig, but the spade was in other hands. They were not ashamed to beg, but there was none to relieve them. Their own means of subsistence was cut off, all other employments preoccupied, and their excesses, however to be deplored and condemned, can hardly be the subject of surprise. It has been stated the persons in the temporary possession of frames connive at their destruction. If this be proved upon inquiry, it was necessary that such material accessories to the crime should be principals in punishment. But I did hope any measure proposed by His Majesty's government for your lordship's decision would have conciliation for its basis, or if that were hopeless, some previous inquiry, some deliberation would have been deemed requisite, not that we should have been called at once, without examination and without cause, to pass sentences by wholesale and sign death warrants blindfold. But, admitting these men had no cause of complaint, the grievances of them and their employers were alike groundless, they deserved the worst. What efficiency, what imbecility has been evinced in the method chosen to reduce them? Why were the military called out, to be made a mockery of, if they were to be called out at all? As far as the difference of seasons would permit, they merely parodied the summer campaign of Major Sturgeon, and indeed the whole proceedings, civil and military, seem formed on the model of those of the mayor and corporation of Garrett. Such marchings and countermarchings, from Nottingham to Bullnell, from Bullnell to Bareford, from Bareford to Mansfield. And when at length the detachments arrived at their destination, in all the pride, pomp, and circumstance of glorious war, they came just in time to witness the mischief which had been done and ascertain the escape of the perpetrators, to collect the spolia opima in the fragments of broken frames, and return to their quarters amidst the derision of old women and hootings of children. Now, though in a free country, it were to be wished our military should never be too formidable, at least to ourselves. I cannot see the policy of placing them in situations where they can only be made ridiculous. As the sword is the worst argument that can be used, so should it be the last. In this instance, it was the first, but providentially as yet only in the scabbard. The present measure will indeed pluck it from the sheath, yet had proper meetings been held in the earlier stages of these riots, had the grievances of these men and their masters, for they also have their grievances, been fairly weighed and justly examined, I do think that means might have been devised to restore their workmen and tranquility to the country. At present the county suffers from the double infliction of an idle military and a starving population. In what state of apathy have we been plunged so long that now for the first time the House has been officially apprised of these disturbances? All this has been transacting within 130 miles of London, and yet we good easy men have deemed full our greatness was ripening, and sat down to enjoy our foreign triumphs in the midst of domestic calamity. But all the cities you have taken, all the armies which retreated before you, are but paltry subjects of self-congratulation if your land divides against itself, and your dragoons and executioners must be let loose against your fellow citizens. You call these men a mob, desperate, dangerous, ignorant, and seem to think the only way to quiet the bella multorum capitum is to lop off a few superfluous heads. But even a mob may be better reduced to reason by a mixture of conciliation and firmness than by additional irritation and penalty. Are we aware of our obligations to a mob? It is a mob that labor in your fields and serve in your houses, that man your navy, recruit your army, have enabled you to defy all the world, and can also defy you, when neglect and calamity have driven them to despair. You may call these people a mob, but do not forget that a mob too often speaks the sentiments of the people. And here I must remark with what alacrity you have accustomed to fly to the succor of your distressed allies, leaving the distress of your own country to the care of Providence or the parish. When the Portuguese suffered under the retreat of the French, every arm was stretched out, every hand opened from the rich man's largesse to the widow's mite, all bestowed to enable them to rebuild their villages and replenish their granaries. And at this moment, when thousands of misguided but most unfortunate fellow countrymen are struggling with the extremes of hardship and hunger, as your charity began abroad, it should end at home. A much less sum, a tithe of the bounty bestowed on Portugal, even if these men, which I cannot admit without inquiry, could not have been restored to their employment, would have been rendered unnecessary the tender mercies of the bayonet and the gibbet. But doubtless our funds have too many foreign claims to admit a prospect of domestic relief. I have traversed the seat of war in the peninsula. I have been in some of the most oppressed provinces of Turkey, but never under the most despotic of infidel governments did I behold such squalid wretchedness as I have since my return in the very heart of a called Christian country. And what are your remedies? After months of inaction and months of action worse than inactivity, at length comes forth the grand specific, the never-failing nostrum of all state physicians from the days of Draco to the present. After feeling the pulse and shaking the head over the patient, prescribing the usual course of warm water and bleeding, the warm water of your mawkish police, the lancets of your military, these convulsions must terminate in death, the sure consummation of the prescriptions of all political sangrados. Setting aside the palpable injustice and the certain inefficiency of the bill, are there not capital punishments sufficient on our statutes? Is there not blood enough upon your penal code, that more must be poured forth to ascend to heaven and testify against you? How will you carry this bill into effect? Can you commit a whole county to their own prisons? Will you erect a gibbet in every field and hang up men like scarecrows? Or will you proceed by decimation, place the country under martial law, depopulate and lay waste all around you, and restore Sherwood Forest as an acceptable gift to the crown in its former condition of a royal chase and an asylum for outlaws? Are these the remedies for a starving and desperate populace? Will the famished wretch who has braved your bayonets be appalled by your gibbets? When death is a relief, and the only relief is it appears that you will afford him, will he be dragooned into tranquility? Will that which could not be effected by your grenadiers be accomplished by your executioners? If you proceed by the forms of law, where is your evidence? Those who have refused to impeach their accomplices when transportation only was the punishment, will hardly be tempted to witness against them when death is the penalty. With all due deference to the noble lords opposite, I think a little investigation, some previous inquiry, would induce even them to change their purpose. That most favorite state measure, so marvelously efficacious in many and recent instances, would not be without its advantage in this. When a proposal is made to emancipate or relieve, you hesitate, you deliberate for years, you temporize and tamper with the minds of men, but a death bill must be passed offhand without a thought of the consequences. Sure I am, from what I heard and from what I have seen, that to pass the bill under all the existing circumstances, without inquiry, without deliberation, would only be to add injustice to irritation and barbarity to neglect. The framers of such a bill must be content to inherit the honors of that Athenian lawgiver, whose edicts were said to be written not in ink but in blood. But suppose it passed, suppose one of these men, as if I have seen them meager with famine, sullen with despair, careless of a life which your lordships are perhaps about to value at something less than the price of a stocking frame. Suppose this man, surrounded by those children from whom he is unable to procure bread, at the hazard of his existence, about to be torn forever from a family which he lately supported in a peaceful industry, and which it is not his fault he can no longer so support. Suppose this man, and there are 10,000 of them, from which you may select your victims, dragged into court to be tried for this new offense by this new law. Still, there are two things wanting to convict and condemn him. These are, in my opinion, 12 butchers for a jury and a Jeffreys for a judge.